Tom had always been a pragmatic man, a journalist by trade, who dealt in facts and scoffed at the notion of ghosts and goblins. But after a harrowing experience covering war zones, he was left with a frayed nervous system and a deep need for a quieter life. Seeking solitude and a place far from his previous high-stakes existence, he chose an old apartment in the outskirts of the city. It was in a dilapidated building that most people would avoid, but Tom saw it as a perfect retreat, a place to heal and write his first book. The building was nearly empty, save for one other tenant, an old man named Mr. Abernathy, who had lived there for decades. Mr. Abernathy warned Tom upon his arrival of odd happenings in the building, shadows that moved against logic, cold drafts in closed rooms, and the unnerving sensation of being watched. Tom, ever the skeptic, laughed it off as the superstitious ramblings of an elderly man. The apartment itself was on the second floor, facing an equally old and abandoned factory across the street. Its windows were boarded up, giving it a blind, forlorn look. Tom's apartment, with its peeling wallpaper and musty smell, felt like a capsule stuck in time. He spent his days setting up his space and his nights trying to ignore the creaks and groans of the old building. It was on a sleepless night while Tom was at his desk writing that he first noticed the figure. It was just a silhouette, a darker patch against the dark interior of the factory windows. Thinking it was a trick of the light, he shook his head and returned to his work. But night after night the figure returned, always appearing in the same window, always watching him. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Tom decided to investigate. He ventured across the street in the dead of night, armed with nothing but a flashlight and his skepticism. Inside the factory, dust motes danced in the beams of his flashlight, and the silence was oppressive. As he approached the window from which the figure had watched him, his heart raced. There, in the dust on the floor, were fresh footprints, an impossible occurrence given the boarded-up windows and locked doors. The footprints led to a small room at the back of the factory, which contained nothing but an old chair facing the window. On the chair lay a journal, aged and covered in dust. Tom took the journal back to his apartment. The entries were written by a young woman named Lillian, who had worked in the factory during the 1920s. Her writing spoke of her deep loneliness and her tragic love for a man who never returned her affections. The last entry chillingly detailed her decision to wait for him by the window every night, hoping to catch a glimpse of him passing by. Moved by Lillian's story, Tom felt an overwhelming need to acknowledge her plight. He wrote a piece about the factory and its forgotten worker, which was published in a major newspaper. The story generated public interest, and soon a local historical society took on the project of restoring the factory, planning to turn it into a museum. The night after his article was published, Tom watched as the figure appeared once more in the window. This time, however, after a few moments, it faded away, never to be seen again. The chill that had permeated his apartment dissipated, and for the first time since he had moved in, the building felt truly empty. Tom stayed in the apartment, his book now taking a supernatural twist inspired by his experiences. He often looked out at the old factory, now bustling with restoration activity, and wondered about the thin veil between past and present. Though he never saw Lillian again, he felt a sense of peace, believing that his acknowledgement of her story had given her the closure she needed to move on.